And good evening and welcome to another Rams Review podcast review. This week we're game 7 and we're facing the mighty Norwich City. And who better to discuss all things Norwich City than Connor Southwell, who's the chief reporter of the Pink 'Un that covers Norwich City and also the host of the podcast, the Pink 'Un. Connor, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Really appreciate you joining us on the show to talk all things Norwich City. So we'll dive straight in. Last season, obviously the playoffs and a rival, an old foe of ours, Leeds United. How do you think last season went? Was it a positive? Although the end was very disappointing in general, was it an expected finish, or were you wanting to do more?
Oh, blimey! How long have you got? Last season, yeah. I think you could separate it really in terms of outcome. Obviously, nobody wants to lose in the playoffs, but sixth place finish, Norwich finished in the playoffs. I think if you'd have offered everyone of a yellow and green persuasion that this time last year, I think they'd have absolutely bitten your hand off, to be honest, for that outcome. The way it unfolded was probably less palatable, if I'm honest. The style of football that David Wagner played, the general direction and strategy of the club, which was based around more sort of experienced players. That, you know, at its peak, Norwich had 11 players over the age of 30. The style of play was not great. It was direct and not really what Norwich fans want to see. And it probably felt like there was a real struggle in terms of connection as well for the most part. And I think even when you reflect now, if the whole thing felt quite surreal because it felt like the mood should have been a lot more positive than it was, given the results, particularly when you consider Norwich were 17th in November and went on this tremendous run. They're 20 plus games unbeaten at Carrow Road now. They beat Ipswich Town, obviously, which is a big thing over here. And yet there was still this feeling that something wasn't quite right and something wasn't quite clicking. And there was maybe this disconnection between supporters and what they were seeing on the pitch, even though it was winning. So the whole thing felt a little bit strange. In terms of expectation, it was probably about par, I think, for second season in the Championship for the squad that Norwich City had. But yeah, it's difficult, I think, when you talk about finishing sixth and you try and wrap the context around it that I have, because I think if you're a supporter of Derby or someone else, you would go, well, you know, what more do you want? But with that, so there's a whole lot of context that we need to wrap around it. But yeah, ultimately, I think you could split it between outcome and the way that Norwich City got there.
And bring that forward to the start this season. Obviously, we'll go into your new manager and new ownership. Uh, an interesting start, 2-2-2, with a goal difference of 1 that takes you to the heights of 11th, just behind us. Again, was something that you expected based on the fixtures you've had, or sort of a disappointing start for where you should be?
I think less in terms of the fixtures, more because of everything that's happened over the summer. You touched upon it again. I won't speak about it in too much depth. We're going to go on to it, but been so much change at the club compared to 12 months ago. Basically, every senior position has changed from the top of the football club down to the head coach and now his coaching team. They've had 9 out, 8 in terms of the summer window. So I think all of that probably pointed towards the fact that there was going to be some teething issues and there was going to be a need to gel, I think, at the start of the season. And that has probably created some of the upheaval and some of the inconsistency that we've seen so far. And again, actually, just to sort of feed and lean into a little bit of what we spoke about in terms of last season, there's actually probably a lot more positivity around this time around, even though the start that Norwich City have had, because of the way they're trying to go about things, because of the general strategy of the club, because of the style of football that Johannes Hoftorp is implementing, and it's quite complex. So I think there is a recognition from supporters that it was going to take a little bit of time. And you know, you take that opening day at Oxford, for example, that was completely overshadowed by the fact that Jonathan Rowe, 20 minutes before a team meeting on the day of the game, decided that he wasn't motivated to play. So that then became a massive factor in that. The 2 draws at home, Norwich could have won both of them, should have won definitely one of them, didn't win any of them. And that's the way Championship football goes. Coventry was a really good win, hard fought, maybe not the prettiest, but they were effective, and it was a good result. Then they had an international break, so they didn't have any of that momentum that they got at Coventry to take into Swansea. That was a day where it was so frustrating. They created opportunities, and they had enough opportunities to win that game, even though they weren't at their best, and probably feels like really that they beat themselves. And then Watford was probably the biggest step forward that we've seen so far in terms of performance and results. So, like you say, mixed, but I think probably that is what people expected here. It always felt like it would be a little bit of a slow burner because of how much change has happened over the summer.
So let's leave Torrent to one side for one moment. Mark Atanasio, the new shareholder, I believe it's 85% is in negotiations with. I don't think the deal is completed yet. I believe it's still
Correct. Yeah, it's got to be ratified by shareholders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
thoughts on this gentleman? What's his background? Was it a surprise, or do you think that Delia and Wyn Jones had stayed too long, shall we say?
Yeah, I think in terms of the first part of the question about timing, I mean he has been on the board of directors now for a couple of years, so it's been quite a slow transition. It's not been similarly to maybe like yourselves where there's a bit of a crisis and you need to be taken over quickly, and then somebody new comes in and just wants to wipe the slate clean because everything associated with what had gone before maybe wasn't palatable for supporters. That hasn't been the case at all. This has been a slow one. He's came in initially as a minority shareholder. He sort of bought out Michael Folger, who'd been alongside Delia Smith and Michael Wyn Jones for the bulk of their premiership at Norwich City. Came in that way, has steadily sort of remained behind the scenes. He's helped Norwich financially, paid off a lot of loans, helped them with sort of the crash landing that is coming out of the Premier League and going into the Championship and failing to bounce back up. He's absorbed a lot of that financial responsibility, and I think a lot of it as well was Delia and Michael probably wanting to see and make sure that this guy was credible and that he had the interests of Norwich City at heart, because let's be honest, they're not getting any younger, and that makes it difficult to remain at the top of a football club when you're into your 80s. So I think probably a timing element of them for as well in terms of the cycle of life and where life has us all. So and I think realistically they understand that they don't have the pockets and the finances to be able to maybe allow Norwich City to compete with some of the teams in the Championship, let alone in the Premier League. And they've been sort of, they've been punching above their weight for a long period of time. So all of those elements really, and it's been a slow transition, but I think for all of those reasons and the financial realities of staying in the Championship year on year means that they probably did have to look for some external investment, because if not, as you guys know, you can get yourself in trouble pretty quickly. So it's probably more inevitable. It's maybe, we could probably have a separate debate about how sad it is that owners like Delia and Michael are no longer really able to own their football clubs. But yeah, the way they've gone about it, the way that it's been done as a takeover, I think a lot of Norwich fans have been, depends on who you are, some have been a little bit impatient, but I think most people appreciate the way that it's gone. And as we say, if this gets ratified, then it's going to be a completely new era for Norwich City as a football club, and one that in my lifetime we haven't seen. So it's a big moment, and when that meeting does come in the next month or so to formally ratify it, and Delia and Michael step down, it's going to be a really weird moment, I think, for a lot of people not to have those two at the top of the football club. But I think the feeling is now that it probably is the right moment for them to relinquish control and for Norwich City to head in a new direction, as they have done on the footballing side.
Oh, absolutely. And let's hope he's not late for that final meeting and Delia has to get onto the table and shout out, "Where are you? Where are you?" Which is still, in my opinion, in one of the top 10 all-time bits of television I think I've ever seen. That was incredible. That and Phil Jones and his team talk at half time. Both, I think, against Man City, funny enough, but there you go. So let's move on. Jonas Hop Thorup from the Danish Super League, a 35-year-old who replaced David Wagner. A name I've never heard of, which is pretty obvious, bear in mind I don't really cover the Danish Super League. Tell us a bit about him, his style, and your thoughts when he was announced.
Yeah, you weren't alone. It's not a name that I think anyone, maybe a few, but the vast majority of people hadn't heard of Johannes Oftorup before he arrived at Carrow Road. And again, I think contextually, it's worth adding that Norwich City changed their sporting director as well during last season. So in November, Stuart Webber left the club. That happened a little bit quicker than everyone expected because of what was happening around David Wagner at the time and the club wanting a little bit more clarity. Ben Napper came in, who was head of loans and development pathways at Arsenal. So he really had to bide his time, to be honest, with David Wagner, which wasn't his own manager. And I think we see when new sporting directors, new owners, new people of influence coming at the top of the football club, often they want to pick their own person. And I think that became pretty clear heading in towards the back end of the season with David Wagner, who, as we said, has probably done himself no favours. Did himself favours getting Norwich City into the top six. Whereas if Napper maybe would have pulled the trigger on him in November, it might have been difficult for him to get another job at a similar level. So that's the context around it. And in terms of him himself, he's a really interesting appointment because he's not been a head coach for very long. He'd only been at Nordsjælland for 18 months as a head coach prior to joining Norwich. He'd been in their sort of youth setup, and they're owned by an organisation called Right to Dream, which is quite similar to Brentford in the way that it operates, very data-led, very strategic, works on getting young players and building them as assets before selling them on. And Norwich are heading down a road where they want to be very data orientated. People keep talking about Brighton over here and trying to sort of resemble, not completely, but follow in the footsteps of how they utilize data and to sort of punch above their weight. So very similar. And the coach identification process was very similar, very data led. I think they were linked with Carlos Cuesta, who's one of Mikel Arteta's assistants, but they wanted someone who had been a manager in their own right before, and that experience was valuable. And that's why Johannes Hoff Torup was sort of elevated to the top of the list on play style, on his development with young players, and with where he is. They feel they've got a coach who's on a real upward trajectory. And you have to say, in the weeks that he's been at Norwich City, even though we've spoken about a little bit of an inconsistent start, I think the way that he's communicated, the style of play that he's trying to implement, and we saw that on Saturday probably at his best so far against Watford, all of it has been very impressive. And he has walked and talks like a man who is on the up. And I think that is probably what has caused a lot of excitement amongst Norwich City fans, but equally a recognition that this guy's still young. He's still learning the Championship. It takes time. And I think historically as well, you look at some of the managers that Norwich City have had real success with. They've been guys who, as you said right at the start, a lot of us have been going, well, who's he? Alex Neil, Daniel Farke, maybe even Paul Lambert to a lesser extent. These are guys who maybe have come from relatively unknown places and done really well at the football club. So there's a lot of optimism around him, and long may it continue.
So tell me about his incomings and outgoings. Was he quite quick to get the squad shaped and changed into what he would want to see at the start of the season, or were deals done before he came in? I think he came in at the end of May, if I remember rightly, or early June. And you were saying there was 9 out and 8 in, or the other way around. Has he brought in a Danish influence of players who he's worked with before, or has there been a scouting process that sort of was already there, should we say, and these particular players were just waiting to come in through the doors?
Yeah, I think a mixture of both. They signed a couple of players with Danish influence towards the end of the window, towards the latter stages. Oscar Schwartau, who's an 18-year-old that they signed from Brøndby. That was a player very much that Torup liked, but equally one that the club had watched for a significant period of time. And then the other is a Tunisian international, but he was born in Copenhagen, called Anis Ben Slimani, who they got on loan from Sheffield United, who he's been injured for the last couple of games, so he might not feature on Saturday. But that is someone that Torup coached at under 14 level. So they had a pre-existing relationship, and he signed, I think, the day before deadline day when that opportunity arose. He actually played against Norwich a week before he signed for Sheffield United. Such is the way football works. But beyond that, it's been pretty club-led in terms of the way that they've recruited. It's sort of tried to lean into that data approach that we spoke about. They signed their first signing of the summer was Jose Cordoba, who was playing in Bulgaria and is a Panama international. So you don't get much more geeky than that. I don't think data led than that, because that's not really a market that anyone shops in. And he is a ball playing centre back, very athletic, and someone that they felt would really suit his style of play. So it's been a mix, and within that there's been some good work domestically. Callum Doyle has come in on loan from Manchester City and really impressed. Ben Cruzene from Aston Villa, still quite raw, but looks a pretty good project for Norwich to get their teeth stuck into. They've signed a man called Forson, who was playing in Austria. So they've really tapped into the data approach. But yeah, towards the end of the window, there was a lot more of that Danish influence, which I think probably Norwich fans expected to see a little bit more of over the window. But it's just two. I suspect that will grow the longer that Torup is at the club.
I must admit, a ball-playing centre-half Panamanian playing in Bulgaria, I think is the first signing of that magnitude I think I've ever heard. And I cover other sports as well as football, and that's a new one to me. A familiar name to Derby, Kate Gordon. So we were gutted he left Derby. He went. Now I can't remember if he went pre-administration or during administration. My mind's a blank, but a wonderful talent. I know he went to Liverpool with great expectation. I think he got an injury which severely hindered him quite badly. I want to say broken leg, but I might be wrong on that. But we know how talented he is. Has he fit into the system at Norwich well? Is he getting minutes, or is that yet to come?
Yeah, he's in this spot that often you get when you signing. So he signed late on deadline day, and that came because Abu Kamara, who was a young winger that Norwich had put in a transfer request, which again, one of the situations that Norwich had over the summer, their players not refusing to play. That's the wrong terminology, but electing or suggesting strongly they'd rather not play. They have players putting in transfer requests. They had players like Adam Ida who missed a flight in pre-season because he forgot his phone. There was all sorts that happened over the summer, which wasn't particularly helpful. And that meant that they had to quite quickly identify a winger. That was Kate Gordon, who, as you said, has been out for a significant period of time with, I must confess, I've completely forgotten off the top of my head what the injury was, but he'd been out for about 16 months or something like that. So I think he's arrived at Norwich probably with a little bit of catching up to do in terms of his fitness. I actually watched him last night play a game for Norwich's under-21s against Sparta Prague in the Premier League International Cup, and he only played 45 minutes in that. So I think there is a need to build him up. He made his debut with about 10 minutes to go of the game against Watford on Saturday. So he's someone that we've not really seen a huge amount of yet, and I think there's an acknowledgement that they need to build him up, but they feel that he will offer them a slightly different option in wide areas. He's a ball carrier, someone who can, I think Torup used the word dribbler, a little bit like Borja Sainz, who they've got on the other side, but one that can play on the right. So I think they see him as a slightly different option to maybe what they've got in the building at the moment, rather than somebody who fits cutely into their system. I think his sort of horses for courses is what they want to do, and he provides that. So yeah, we need to see more of him in a Norwich shirt, because he's played about 10 minutes so far of senior football, but definitely someone that hopefully as the season grows older, he will grow in influence. I think that's definitely the hope.
So who should we look out for then? You name one player in the current 11 that's sort of raising eyebrows, or expectation level is higher than you anticipated, or is shining. Who would you go for in the current setup?
I think Josh Sargent's the obvious one in terms of goal scoring. I think in terms of complete strikers in this division, I think he's the best. I think there are individuals that are better at individual things than him, but as a whole package, I think he's the best number 9 at the level. He's had a couple of frustrating weeks, which is maybe slightly ominous for Derby, because I'm sure that frustration he will utilise in the right way in front of goal if those opportunities come. And he's missed some chances that are uncharacteristic for him in the last couple of weeks. So I think there'll be a real desire to get on the score sheet. In terms of form, I think it's hard to look past Callum Doyle at the moment, somebody who's come in from Manchester City and has really impressed. I think a lot of Norwich fans have sort of turned around and sort of looked at each other and gone, how on earth is this guy playing championship football? Because he's looked very adept technically, takes the ball in tight areas. It's not an understatement to say he's been Norwich City's best playmaker, and he's a defender, and he's been playing as a left-sided centre-back, and last week played as a left back. So he's probably the most informed one. It's always funny, I think, when you get asked these questions and you pick out a defender, but he's been really influential and scored at the weekend with an effort that Daniel Batman, I think, will be disappointed he didn't save, but it was a good strike nonetheless. And in terms of general play, just gets Norwich's possession-based play up to areas where they can go and hurt teams. So yeah, Callum Doyle in terms of form, and Josh Sargent probably in terms of pedigree, I would say.
So quickly leading on to your style of play. So your possession-based team is that a back five, or are you playing a flat four with a strong five in the middle? How would you say that Torup's philosophy is of play, and where do you see will it stay as it is, or is he tinkering as such to find what he believes is the right system?
Yeah, a mix. So the fundamentals remain the same. So they are, I would describe them as possession orientated, but not possession extreme. They're not Southampton under Russell Martin. That's not what they are. They're not keeping high amounts of the ball for the sake of keeping high amounts of the ball. It is with a purpose, and that is to move the ball quickly into areas where they can go and exploit and go and attack. They build up predominantly or they did against Watford in a 2-3 structure. So again, they made a big call at the weekend where he took Jack Stacey out of the team and replaced him with Callum Fisher, who'd only started 3 championship games before the weekend. And that was basically on the basis that Watford play with a back five, and they wanted to play with almost a second striker on the right in Ante Cianat. So by pushing Fisher and Doyle in, it allowed them just to change their build-up structure slightly. So even within the fundamentals, which have been possession-based football, and they've built up predominantly in that way, there have been slight tweaks around the edges, slight bits that has been changed that have seen them tailor themselves to the opposition ever so slightly, but they've made a real impact in the games that they've played. I would suggest that, for example, against Swansea, when they were chasing the game, they went to a back three and wing backs, and that meant they went from having basically no chance creation in the game to a lot of chance creation in the final 10 minutes. So that he's probably mixed that sort of ideology with pragmatism, I would suggest, based on opponent, and he's done that with great effect so far. So that's what I would expect. How he sees it in terms of the weekend, and how, if he feels maybe that because Derby have a lot of pace in wide areas, for example, he reverts back to Jack Stacey. I could see that being the case. So I think he's managed to juggle that quite well in terms of building quite a few different structures based on the opponent that they've played. They've built up at points with the left back inverting as a centre back, and then almost building up in a back three in the way that you spoke about, but using their left back as a third centre back. And then that is when Jack Stacey as the right would be given real license to go and bomb on as a separate option. So we've seen a lot of different changes in the opening 6 games so far, but it has been centered around keeping the ball, but inviting opponents to go and press them in order to go and break the press and create opportunities. So yeah, they've been quite versatile, but really interesting actually tactically to watch.
It's interesting because you mentioned Derby's strength, which is pace, and that's something that we're not accustomed to until this last couple of years. And now Paul Warne has pretty much got his squad in, or certainly most of it that he wanted, and the style of play. We're a counter-offensive team. We've played against possession pretty much all season, and we've won 3, lost 3. So make of it what you will. Like I've been saying to Derby fans, I'm not surprised if we go through 46 games, winning 23 at home and losing 23 away. That's the kind of way we play. So looking at the Derby philosophy and the way we set up and the way we play, who strikes fear into you? I would like to say Caden Jackson, obviously because of his Ipswich past. Would you say he is the type of, because he can be dangerous? We've seen what he can do. Or is there some players in the Derby team that you actually from afar admire and think, yeah, he's a very good player?
Yeah, well, I like the look of the lad that you guys had from or have on loan from Palace, but someone told me he's going to be out for this game. Is it
Yeah,
Ozo,
he's gone for 6 weeks. Yeah,
yeah, that's a shame from your perspective. And I was actually really looking forward to watching him play because I like his presence and whatnot. But I think what you mapped out there in terms of that pace. You think of Mendes Lang, Caden Jackson, definitely. Players like that who and Norwich, particularly with Cordoba in the back line, are happier to leave more space in behind. So there is opportunities for those guys to go and exploit, and that's where I think this game is going to be very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see whether Torup adapts to that, because there will be opportunities for you guys to get in behind and to exploit in transition and on the counter. So all of those attacking players, really, I think Paul Warne generally Norwich fans look at and with real fondness, because he's a Norfolk lad. He's a Norwich fan.
He's a Norwich fan.
And he grew up in around the area. And even though he's never actually, a player or manager or coach or fitness coach or whatever, had any association with Norwich City formally, he's someone that Norwich fans think really highly of because of that Norwich connection. And he always speaks in glowing terms about the club. But when Norwich have come up against his Rotherham teams, obviously they've not played him as Derby manager, but as Rotherham manager on the odd occasion that they played him, particularly away from home, he used to get extra percentage out of his team for those games, and Norwich would really struggle. So I think there's a little bit of a little bit of sort of anticipation ahead of this weekend that they're probably going to face the Derby team because of how well he coaches players and gets more out of players based on emotional intelligence. I think the fact that there's probably an expectation he's going to play on that sort of link to try and get 3 points, and that often means that his teams are more motivated when they face Norwich.
No, I agree. I've always wondered, as a professional in sport, when you come against the team that you love and you're from, how it feels inside. Like, will he be wearing a yellow and green scarf or yellow and green underpants under his tracksuit? Who knows? It's an interesting dilemma that I'd love to ask him one day. So, just going to the final 5 minutes. Your thoughts on the championship in general, because Connor, reading your biography, you have immense knowledge of the championship. Who would you say the top three are, or who would you predict the top three being? And so obviously you're 1 and 2 and your playoff winner. Who would you go for at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think firstly, having watched the league last year and having watched the league this year, I think it's a more open division at the top end of it. And by that, I mean, I think the teams that came down aren't of the same quality as the teams that came down last year. So Leeds, Southampton, and the other team who you're gonna shout at me because I've completely forgotten off the top of my head. But no, not Luton. They've come down this year. The other team that went back up, who again is completely. I'm going to kick myself for that. But Leicester, that's it. Yeah, Leicester, and they were significantly stronger, I think, than the three that have come down this year. And so I think it's more open at the top end of the division, and therefore I think there is an opportunity for a team if they can really gallop into that to cause upset at the top two. I think Leeds will win it. I've said that all the way, even after what's been a slightly difficult start. I think they are the best team. If you look at the underlying numbers and all of that type of thing, that they're the best team in the division, I think, for me. So I still expect them to win it. And where my view probably has changed based off the opening few weeks, I can see West Brom actually being that team that steps into that void that's left by maybe those parachute payment teams not being as strong this year. I think Burnley still, there's so much up in the air about them. I think their results maybe have been slightly better than their performances. So we need to see whether that evens out over the campaign. But I'll go Leeds, West Brom top two, and then I think Sheffield United for playoffs, because I think the way that Chris Wilder works, the quality that Sheffield United have, but I think that ability just to be really consistent over the course of the season, I think will pay off. They're a slightly different Chris Wilder team when they came to Carrow Road. They're one that's a bit more possession based, a bit more attractive on the eye, dare I say. There's not any of this sort of back three overlapping centre backs that we became accustomed to. But I think that strong resolve that he's able to build in his squad will probably get them over the line. So yeah, that's who I'm saying. Leeds and West Brom for top two, Sheffield United to come through the playoffs.
Yeah, we faced Chris Wilder last week and we got undone by a Hamer free kick, which we have a fantastic goalkeeper in Zetterstrom from Sweden, and I think it's the only real tactical error he's had so far with his time at Derby. So you cannon fodder, your bottom three. Now we've had some interesting teams been given to me throughout these previews, and I just wonder what your thoughts are, who the bottom three will be, because quite a few people who we've previewed games with haven't mentioned the obvious, which is obviously ourselves. Portsmouth and Oxford, they've sort of actually mentioned teams who have been struggling in the Championship for the last 2 or 3 years. Where your thoughts lie with that?
Yeah, I think you guys will be okay. Is the first point. I think as you said, that strong home record, but equally, I think the quality that you've got, you'll be fine. I think there's a very clear bottom four developing from what I can see, which is Cardiff, who have had a really poor start to the season. It's going to be interesting to see whether that managerial change will provoke a little bit of life out of them. Preston, I think, have been really poor so far. Obviously, they have changed their manager, so whether Paul Heckingbottom can get a little bit more out of them. Plymouth, obviously, the other ones, in Portsmouth. I think that to me feels at this moment in time like a pretty clear bottom four from what we are seeing at present, based on performances and numbers and probably results so far as well. So again, there's always going to be a team that get dragged into it. I think, having watched Watford last week, I fear for them if they continue defending the way they are, but they've probably got another 3 managers in them. So, and I still think that their squad has a little bit too much quality.
Yeah, 12 Udinese players, no doubt, to come through the door in January.
Exactly. So I think they're an interesting one, but I think you guys will be okay actually. And maybe it's the Norfolk in me rooting for another Norfolk boy, but I think Paul Warren will do okay, and we'll keep you well above that dreaded drop zone. If I'm honest.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, we had some news in Derby. You may have seen that we've got a takeover potentially happening, another one already, but a positive one, which if it came through the door before the January transfer window, should we say, it will be very interesting, especially if Derby are there or thereabouts. So finally, score prediction. Been a fantastic chat, Connor, and fascinating to hear about Norwich and where they are now. Where do you see the game going? What do you think the score prediction will be?
Yeah, I've always got in my head that Norwich don't particularly do very well against Derby or at Derby. But there tends to be goals in it, and there's usually like a former player on one of the sides as well. That's Kate Gordon this weekend, I guess. But it's gonna be really tough, and you guys haven't conceded a goal at home. You've got 100% record, as you've mentioned, really strong. I think this is going to be a tough game after what Norwich had last week, which was a real step forward in terms of their style of play and Hofball, as it's been branded in these parts. It would be nice to see a little bit of consistency of results. Now, what they've probably failed to do is they produce some really good performances, but haven't really backed that up with then two results on the spin. So it'd be good to see that from an Norwich perspective. I think this is going to be a really tough one though, and I could see actually a draw. So I'm leaning towards a 1-1 draw. I think for this weekend.
Yeah, do you know what? I was going to say the same, but I just think that you've mentioned the fact that there's going to be space behind your back four, and inevitably chances are going to be given. And Derby are one of those teams that if you give them 10 chances, they'll normally slot in two. And I think that's been Derby's problem, that the percentage of actually the ratio of converting from chances. Because I think our XG on chances made is pretty high in the league. So it'd be interesting. Kind of just finally, where can people follow you on social media? Because you clearly know your stuff, and someone would definitely like to chat to again in the future.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm on CJ Southwell 1902 on most social media platforms. My work is on at Pinken on X as well, or www.pinken.com. We have all the latest news on Norwich City. Follow them home and away. Really looking forward to being at Pride Park at the weekend and bringing all the analysis to that. So yeah, pinken.com is the place to find all my work.
Brilliant. Well, Connor Southwell, thank you very much for your time this evening. And we wish Norwich well for the rest of the season. I think you'll do fine this year. I think both clubs will be there or thereabouts. I think we'll both take a mid-table transition. So, Connor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the Rams Review podcast preview with Connor Southwell covering Norwich City.